what's up, everybody? Chad Calek here, and welcome back to the In a Crowded Room podcast, where on this episode, we're going to talk about a false flag event that is going on right now, and it's actually a false flag event that has been going on for decades. And we're going to talk about a gentleman named Michael Ruppert. If you don't know who Michael Ruppert is, it's a very important name. And his contribution to understanding everything that I'm going to be talking about is very important. But before we get into all of this, I know it's been a very long time since I posted a podcast, and I apologize for that. I'm going to talk about it more in detail on an upcoming Q&A episode as to what happened. But to make a long story short, unfortunately I did have some medical issues again that caused me to have a brief stint back in the hospital in which I was intubated again for a short period of time, which caused me to lose my voice for a couple more weeks. That's why it's a little scratchy right now. But I am good. Everything is going good. I will explain it all, like I said, coming up. And I also, unfortunately, had some things go down with some family members that was pretty scary. So I really just had to take time away to make sure that everything was in fact okay with me, which it appears to be. Everything is good. I feel great, and everything's going fine now. So I am back at it. Having said that, let's get into what I want to talk to all of you about today. The false flag that I'm referring to is the war on drugs, which we're hearing about a lot of events in the news now, of the bombing of these boats off the coast of Venezuela. And we'll get there. I will address that and talk about why it matters to me and why that is part of the false flag that's going on. But before we dive into this, one thing I want everybody to understand, that this is not a partisan conversation. I think a lot of people assume because I live in Los Angeles that I'm a massive progressive or a massive liberal. I've grown up, my entire family, my entire life has been Republican. My dad was, as you guys know, a career Air Force engineer. His brother was a high-ranking Air Force official as well. In fact, my Uncle Joe was a graduate from VMI. My Uncle Butch is a Marine. My Uncle Roger Rounds is a Marine. My grandpa, who I'm named after, he was actually a pilot that has 2 Purple Hearts for being shot down in Korea. So I have a very Republican military, based family. Personally, I would say that I am truly, I guess, a centrist. If I had to really explain what I am, I guess I would be something similar to a Jeffersonian anarchist in the sense that I really wished each state could just govern itself and that we only had a national military. I know that's pretty far away from what we have. But my point in all this is that this conversation truly is not about Republican or Democrat, because both Republican and Democrat cabinets, presidencies, and otherwise have both carried on this same false flag that has been going on forever. And I just don't think most people realize that it's happening, and it keeps happening. Growing up in southern Texas, we would constantly hear about the drugs that were coming across the border, the Rio Grande. I grew up in Alvin, Texas, the suburb of Houston, and this was always a thing. There would always be stories on the news of people getting captured with these knapsacks of, drugs, or they would discover a new tunnel or something like that. And I remember even thinking as a young child, like, man, how are they getting enough drugs from Mexico to service everybody in the United States? I mean, the math doesn't work, right? I mean, America is huge. And I remember thinking as a young kid, like, if all the drugs are just coming from Mexico, this one landmass that we, know where the country line is, why can't we stop this? But I always just assumed It's because, supply and demand, the demand was high enough that they found a way to supply through sneaky methods, through, like I said, tunnels, driving things just, over the border checks, all that stuff. As I got older, of course, I start realizing there's just no way. There's no way that Mexico could be servicing all of America. There's no possible way. I mean, the amount of drugs that it takes to service America, I'm talking illicit drugs, street drugs, in one day. I mean, just think of the amount of drugs that are consumed in America in a single day. And I started realizing as I got older, there's no way that's possible. All the drugs can't be coming from Mexico. And that's when I started learning that there were some, people that produced them here in the country and grew them. And then I started learning about big pharma. And all of this became really obvious to me during the OxyContin explosion. Because, I mean, everybody was on some kind of drug. I mean, like, you could have the tiniest little headache and doctors would be cutting you scripts for Oxy for a while there, especially in the beginning, like early 2000s. And we've seen all the movies about it. And we know now for a fact that this was Big Pharma that was doing this. And our government knew about it. We knew this was going on. We knew this. So during that whole time period, as Big Pharma was flooding the streets with, OxyContin, which is a very just high-grade version of heroin, now that made sense to me how, at least when it came to that drug, how America's, their need was being met because it was illegally, being, made by the big pharma companies. Now, when I say illegally, I'm talking about the story that hasn't been written. Yes, doctors were cutting scripts, of course, but still, the amount of illicit drugs that were being sold on the street, the amount of pills that were being sold on the street, there's no way that the pharmaceutical companies didn't know the mass volumes that they were making. And there's no way they didn't know that the volume that it takes to feed the, addicted hunger of 300 million, a nation of 300 million people in which, 30% at one point they were saying, was addicted. We're talking about 100 million people. The amount of stock that would have taken to just supply just that drug is insane. So we keep hearing about this war against drugs and how we got to stop all the drugs coming from into our country, which Mexico, I'm not saying that they're not bringing drugs in. There are definitely, routes and chains where drugs were coming in, but nothing close to the amount that would feed the entire United States. So the only possible way that it could be coming in, I would think, at the time, would be if we're in league, like meaning if the CIA or somebody's working with the pharmaceutical companies and as well as companies or people overseas, as far like the Pablo Escobars, right? The cocaine, like the amount of cocaine that America consumes and has consumed for the past, since Escobar. We're talking about decades. There's no way that the insatiable appetite for it could be met without the assistance of the government doing it. So there's just no way. There's no possible way. Now, this was my early theory going on in life, but I didn't have any way to prove this, but I was just thinking about this. And especially because growing up in Texas, every single, drug bust that we would hear about, it always seemed so small. They'd be like, look at all these drugs we got. And it would be a bunch of like wrapped bags, like on a fold out table. And I remember looking at those going, well, that's enough for Southern Houston tonight. Like that's nothing compared to what, is being consumed by the nation, right? And then late in about 2000, God, I think it was 2000, 2007 or 2008, I'll have to look it up, or 2009, I saw this documentary called Collapse. And I was excited to see it because it was directed by a gentleman named Chris Smith. Chris Smith is an Iowa documentarian that got his break after making this documentary called American Movie. And it was an amazing documentary about two filmmakers from Milwaukee, Wisconsin that were just crazy dudes that were trying to make it in this world as filmmakers. And it was, incredible documentary. So when I heard that Chris Smith was doing this next documentary about Collapse, and it was about how America would eventually be facing the circumstances in which it would collapse on itself, which capitalism would collapse. And again, if you haven't seen this documentary, it is fantastic. Definitely check it out. But it's essentially this one guy, Michael Ruppert, that sits down in this room and he just explains things like fiat currency and peak oil, which is the amount of oil that the world has to offer when you reach the 50% point. It talks about the Industrial Revolution and how all things have grown. All markets of all nations have grown off the back of the Industrial Revolution, which is, of course, driven by oil. And once you're past peak oil, you now have a timeline as to when oil is going to run out and when other alternative fuel sources have to step up, basically. And it's just an incredibly scary documentary about kind of everything that's going on in the world today, right? That's pretty much what's going on. I can make a whole other episode on everything that he discusses in Collapse, but I became very interested in who this Michael Ruppert was. And I kept kind of following him and listening to him. He was one of the first people to also point out the inconsistencies in 9/11 and everything that took place with the towers that was off, and Tower 7. But when I started doing research with him, it blew my mind because I learned that his parents worked for the CIA. And he later came up as a beat cop for the LAPD. And he later did different investigating. He was an investigator for different, murders and just LA crime. And then one day, he's in the port of Los Angeles, and he discovers a CIA tanker ship filled with drugs. Massive amounts of everything from coke, heroin, pill, like you name it, just tankers filled with drugs. And he decides that he is going to go on national television and blow the whistle on it, because after he finds it, he goes back and he reports it. And he's not only told, shut the fuck up, he's threatened. People try to kill him. This guy has a crazy, crazy story, which again, I can do a whole other episode on his story. He eventually moved to Colorado. The powers that be just set out to crush and destroy this guy financially and in every way that you can imagine. He was actually quite a musician. He ended up making a couple of albums, like folk rock type albums. And he committed suicide, or was he suicided? That's a question. I'll let you decide on that when you look into his history. And please do Google Michael Ruppert. Just Google Michael Ruppert Collapse and just follow his story. But I wanted you to see when he went on the news to talk about this discovery that he made at the Port of LA. Check this out.
I will tell you, Director Deutsch, as a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, that the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time.
Wait a minute. Will you please take your seats? I will come back to you as we roll back across to the center section.
Director Deutsch, I will refer you to 3 specific agency operations known as Amadeus, Pegasus, and Watchtower. I have Watchtower documents heavily redacted by the agency. I was personally exposed to CIA operations and recruited by CIA personnel who attempted to recruit me in the late 70s to become involved in protecting agency drug operations in this country. I have been trying to get this out for 18 years, and I have the evidence. My question for you is very specific, sir. If in the course of the IG's investigations and Fred Hitz's work, you come across evidence of severely criminal activity,
Let him speak
and it's classified, will you use that classification to hide the criminal activity, or will you tell the American people the truth?
If you have information about CIA illegal activity in drugs, you should immediately bring that information to wherever you want, but let me suggest 3 places. The Los Angeles Police Department,
please. I'm sorry, others want to hear this answer. I am sorry, others want to hear this answer.
It is your choice, the Los Angeles Police Department, the Inspector General, or office of one of your Congress persons from this.
18 years ago, sir, and I got shot at for it.
Wait a minute, sir. Wait a minute, sir.
And?
Sir, you have not gotten the mic yet. You are not. But wait a minute, then don't speak out of turn.
Let me say something else. If this information turns up wrongdoing, we will bring the people to justice and make them accountable.
All right, Congressman Dixon.
Sir, I want to thank you for coming. You were at the last meeting. The staff probably had the spelling of your name wrong, but we would like to talk to you. We have been looking for a couple of days for you, and we want to make sure that you contact the committee, because obviously you have some valuable information. If you want to give it to me privately, if you want to hand it to that aide where I can contact you this evening, please do it. Don't let us get away without getting a contact for you.
Thank you, sir.
Pass it up to him now so everyone can see that I got it. That would be fine.
Thank you, sir. And for the record, Mike.
Please keep the noise down so that we can hear and we can get answers.
For the record, my name is Mike Ruppert, Ruppert. I did bring this information out 18 years ago, and I got shot at and forced out of LAPD because of it. I've been on the record for 18 years nonstop, and I'll be happy to give you, Congressman, anything that I have.
Thank you, Mr. Ruppert.
Now, as shocking as this is, it makes all kinds of sense to me. And again, you could read up on Ruppert. He just got destroyed by, like I said, the deep state after this all happened. Pretty much lost everything and was on the run for his life. But it made sense to me because there's just no way that Mexicans with backpacks or underground trains are bringing in the amount of drugs that it would take to supply America, nor are there enough speedboats and little prop planes coming from Colombia, to bring us all the drugs that, supply America, for Coke. And even like when, once the Sackler family and the OxyContin grift was up and everybody was now being cut off by the doctors and all the dealers went dry, America saw a 90% increase in the use of heroin. So heroin just replaced the pills. Well, the interesting thing about that is, do you know what the real assets are of Afghanistan? The number one export of Afghanistan is heroin. And in fact, a lot of those poppy fields are still under the control of the U.S. today. So again, if there's a real war on drugs, coming into America, it's a war that's at our ports. We can shut down the drugs that are coming in. Because if we're to believe that, a massive amount of drugs that was feeding America's drug addicted, addicts was coming from Mexico, well, from what we've been told in the last year, immigration in the Mexican border is now shut down, right? Nobody's coming over. So if nobody's coming over, why hasn't there been, a decline in drug use in America, which there hasn't been. It's the same as it's always been. This brings us to fentanyl. The way fentanyl has ravaged America is unlike anything else because if you do your research on this, and I'm sure a lot of you have, and look, I'm speaking as somebody who has gone through addiction and specifically with pills and all that stuff. And, mine came from a doctor who was writing the scripts back in 2007. And it was brutal. It was brutal to go through it. And, but the thing that was interesting is people act like fentanyl is some new scourge on humanity. Fentanyl is the same thing as OxyContin, except for it's synthetic. It's made really cheap. It's really cheap to produce. It's not built off a poppy plant. And it's just shorter acting. So drug dealers are able to basically make really small, tiny amounts of it that they can sell for as low as $1 a pill. And it only works for a couple hours to the addict, the person that's addicted to it. Now, it's been used in the hospital since like 1960. So all of Big Pharma has been producing fentanyl this entire time. It's nothing new. It's an incredibly effective drug if you're going to have surgery. It's an incredibly effective drug for people who are like stage 4 cancer. In fact, 3 years ago, I had 3 surgeries. When I first was, for that long period that I was, hospitalized. And all 3 of those surgeries, they gave me fentanyl before I went in, and they gave it to me after I woke up right away. Because when you have high amounts of pain that you need to stomp out immediately, that stuff works incredibly well. They also use it for women who give birth. I mean, there's nothing new about fentanyl. There's nothing necessarily special about it either, except for you can make it really cheap, and you can press it and sell it for really cheap. So there is definitely a degree of the fentanyl in America that people are using that is made by Big Pharma, for sure. And the big thing about Mexico, what they do better than anybody else is manufacturing. They do manufacturing better. So a lot of the chemicals that you need to make fentanyl comes from China, and it goes to Mexico where they manufacture it. There's nothing new that I'm breaking here as far as how it's made. But that's where Mexico becomes important. But it begs the question of, if Mexico is producing tons of the illicit fentanyl that is hitting our streets, and we want to really, stomp that out. And we know that Mexico also, brings in coke, heroin. They also bring in, weed as well. Like, Mexico's right there. If there was any country that we should be bearing down on with our military, if we wanted to really stop it, it would be Mexico. But that's not what's happened. El Chapo was in jail, was arrested. He was the head of the Sinaloa cartel, which was the most powerful cartel over there. Actually, he wasn't the head of it. He was believed to be the head of it. But there was another guy named El Mayo that was above him. El Chapo was brought back to jail in America. And he sat in a jail. And he rotted there throughout Biden's entire presidency. But when Trump got in, something really unique happened. El Mayo was captured over in Mexico. And then all of a sudden, when people thought that, oh my God, Trump might be actually dropping bombs on Mexico. I mean, they're manufacturing all of these drugs, which are somehow finding their way they've got to be coming through our ports, right? Because they're not coming through the border, right? We're led to believe that there's no immigration, there's no drugs coming in through Mexico, right? So if that's not happening, then they've got to be going through the ports, because how else are they getting into America? Well, we know a percentage of it of the fentanyl is being made by the Big Pharma, our own Big Pharma companies, because that's supplied through all the hospitals. And when you have supply lines running through hospitals, those same supply lines reach the street. That's how that's happened. But the other part of all the fentanyl supposedly is The chemicals come from China, it's manufactured in Mexico and then somehow brought in. So why wouldn't we, if we're going to be threatening Venezuela with our military to stop drugs, quote, false flag, why would we not be, telling Mexico, look, we're going to come in hard and we're going to, blow the shit out of everybody who's making this stuff. And, Trump initially talked about that, but he didn't do that. And just so you know, every other president has talked tough about Mexico and then does nothing as well. So there's nothing new about what's going on in this scenario. The only thing that was new is that El Chapo, who supposedly is in jail this year, his entire family, 19 members of his family, were privately flown to the United States and put into witness protection.
This video, taken Friday, shows more than a dozen relatives of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman coming across the U.S.-Mexico border in San Isidro with rolling suitcases in hand.
Ovidio, como lo vimos todos en las noticias, comienza una negociación.
In an interview Monday, Mexico's Secretary of Security said the U.S. Department of Justice offered their entry as part of a deal with Ovidio Guzman Lopez. Guzman Lopez is one of two sons of El Chapo who are currently being held in Chicago on major drug trafficking charges. He's now set to plead guilty.
This is definitely a very unique situation.
Attorney Cesar Luna says this appears to be an arrangement of cooperation in exchange for protection, and an indicator the family fears violent retaliation.
The son who's in prison, I'll talk, but you need to protect my family.
News of their arrival surfaced the same day federal prosecutors in San Diego unveiled new indictments against alleged cartel leaders.
Let me be direct. To the leaders of the Sinaloa cartel, you are no longer the hunters. You are the hunted.
Though they declined to comment on the relatives of its most infamous kingpin.
Yeah, we're going to focus on this case. Next question.
But Luna says they're inextricably tied together.
We're seeing lately that the administration is being very forceful on drug trafficking.
No tenemos la información oficial o pública.
And as the Mexican president says the U.S. has shared few details of the deal, it raises questions about the relationship between the two nations.
What are the issues of sovereignty? What's the cooperation looking like? So it's very, very interesting.
Court records show Guzman Lopez's change of plea hearing is set for July in Chicago. From San Isidro, Shelby Bremer, NBC7.
It's not clear where exactly the family is located. Today, the Department of Justice declined.
So they could be living on an island for all we know. And then El Mayo and his family were also brought over into the United States. And they know for a fact that El Chapo's kids are now running the Sinaloa cartel. Why does El Chapo and El Mayo and their families, why do they feel safer in America? Why do they feel safer in America? Could it be because they traded their protection to basically hand over their production to the U.S., to the government? Because I can tell you, it's not like drug addiction in America has just stopped. And the streets are clean and there's no drugs. What blew me away about fentanyl is it was not only available in like the major cities, in like Cleveland or Cincinnati, it was on the streets in Toledo. It was in Kansas City and in like Topeka, like every small city in America to medium-sized city, like it's ungodly how much fentanyl was just pummeled out into the streets. And that was the next step down. If you can't afford OxyContin, which it became too expensive because of the crackdown, then it went to heroin, and then for the druggies that can't afford heroin, well, surely anybody can afford $1, right? Like, even beggars can get $1 a day, like that type of shit. So it just went down, and somebody's collecting. Somebody's collecting. And then I go back to Michael Ruppert, and he's like, listen, I know who's collecting. It's our government. It's a business. And you got to stop and think about this, too. Finding a ship at the port filled with drugs is one thing. The infrastructure that it takes to distribute the amount of narcotics that is consumed on a daily basis in America. Let's not forget that 90% of the world's narcotics, 90%, are consumed in the United States. That's a fact. Please Google it and look it up. So, when you're hearing about Venezuela right now, and we're blowing up boats and killing people, understand something. And this is a fact too. Please Google this. Fentanyl is not coming from Venezuela into the United States. Those boats that are being shot are like 1,000 nautical miles away from the tip, of the United States, of Florida, the Gulf of Mexico. Like that route that they're getting bombed on services the UK. Venezuela, they have no history of providing any amount of drugs through America that could even put a dent. Like if we stopped all drug imports coming from Venezuela into America, it's like less than a fraction of 1%. It's nothing. It's nothing. So when they say things like, oh, well, there's enough fentanyl on those boats to kill 25,000 people. Well, first of all, that's a weird way to even look at it, because how could you possibly know what's on the boats because you're blowing them up? Secondly, fentanyl is a weird drug because if somebody just took 3 or 4 pills, the average person that was clean and had no tolerance, yeah, fentanyl could kill you. But when you hear things like, yeah, there's they're killing 25,000 people in a day, and there was enough drugs on that boat to kill 100 million people. I mean, there's not 100 million people that are ODing. I saw Trump say that, like in one interview. It's like, there's enough drugs on those boats to kill 100 million people. That's how many people we saved. That's 1/3 of the U.S. population. So, I mean, that's just not possible. Not to say that they aren't up to no good in Venezuela. Venezuela has its own problems, but I'm just saying that they are not a known source for the U.S. of fentanyl or any other drug. Mexico is, and we seem to be more in league with the cartels than we are, threatening them with full-out military, interaction. So why? Why are we interested in Venezuela? Well, the false flag is that they're pushing drugs and fentanyl to the U.S. That's not true. They're not doing that. But why are we acting like that? Well, the one thing that we are past, going back to Michael Ruppert, is peak oil. We are past the halfway point of the available oil that's going to be left on planet Earth that we can get out of the ground. And the other countries that are strong, being Russia and China, have their own oil reserves and their oil reserves that they rely upon. And the more and more, we can provide other countries with oil reserves, the more and more we can strengthen who we are as a country. Venezuela does not have shit for a military, but they have a ton of oil. They have a ton of oil. So if we make it look like they're, boating one boat at a time full of fentanyl through 1,000 nautical miles of ocean. Do you know how, if you've ever been out on the ocean in the Gulf of Mexico, do you know how far 1,000 nautical miles is? I mean, there ain't enough gas in that boat to even get anywhere close to the United States. And who in the hell would try to take a speedboat from Venezuela to the Gulf of Mexico or Florida or Texas or any of those ports? There's no way. There's no way. So I think of Michael Ruppert because he was the one saying, listen, we're going to need oil. We're going to need oil. That's what this is all about. We're going to need oil. And this has been going on forever. Sorry, I have a bit of a cold too, by the way, guys. But this has been going on for a long time. I mean, this dates all the way back to the Reagan stay no to drugs era. I mean, back then it was Mexico has all these drugs. The Mexicans are killing the United States. And at the same time, Big Pharma was doing more damage than anybody. And I stand by that. More damage has been done to the human population of America, to all of us, by Big Pharma than anybody else. The amount of people that OxyContin alone has killed is ungodly. I mean, you got to think there was, 3,600 people, is that correct, that we lost in 9/11? That's nothing compared to what the Sacker family has done to America. And now, I mean, fentanyl has become a scourge because of the lives that it's taken, because it's cheap, because, you could actually finally break a narcotic down to a dollar level where $1 can buy a pill. And that was the benefit of it. It was super cheap, quick, and easy to make a ton of it. But the drug itself isn't the problem. The problem is the sick mind of the pusher. And unfortunately, guys like Michael Ruppert that tried to sound the alarm and tried to get our government agencies to stop poisoning this country with the massive amount of drugs that he saw coming through the port of Los Angeles. Those same tankers are going through, New Orleans, through, Miami, it's all across all of our port cities. And then there is a set up system to distribute all of that shit. So there's no way that any of that stuff could operate without, at the very least, oversight of our government. And it's $1 trillion business. The drug industry, the illicit drug industry, is $1 trillion business. There's no way our country is going to miss out on it. There's no way they're going to just go, okay, we're shutting it down. As much as they should, they're not going to. So I just wanted to bring that up and keep that in mind. When you hear about Venezuela, it's not about drugs, it's about their oil. And, please do your own research. Google it, read about it, and look it up. I'm not saying Venezuela, Maduro is not a good guy, and they're not a country ran by angels, that's for sure. But they're also not a country that's poisoning us. And I don't want to see us lose more lives on another country for oil. I've seen it my whole life. My whole life, I've seen this story play out. And I just hope we can avoid it. I really do. Because what's going on right now is the longest running false flag this country has ever seen, and they just keep going back to it. They keep going back to it. Let me know what you guys think. I would love to hear your opinions. Let me know in the comment section below. Much love, everybody, and I will be back tomorrow with more. All the best.